And now I'm going to introduce Bill McKibben, who obviously you all know who he is because you're here. And I just wanted to stress that in addition to being really an amazingly prescient person, he was one of the very first people to be writing about the dangers of climate change more than 30 years ago. And, you know, so tragic that nobody who was actually in power seemed to think that was worth listening to. But, you know, we know he was right, and we know that this is an urgent matter that we have to deal with right now. But the other thing I just wanted to say about Bill is he's an incredibly nice and kind person, and we are so fortunate to have him here. And thank you, Bill. We're ready for you.
Nancy, thank you. Thank you enormously for that. That was very kind, and it was kind of you to ask me to come, and very kind of Reverend Cooper to lend me his pulpit for the evening. And I'm sorry mostly that we're not also going to get to hear the organ playing behind me. It feels like that would add something to the whole occasion. Thanks to Abby for showing the pictures and closer to the, yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll just sort of hunch down here. So I've spent it's actually been a Vermont day for me, which is kind of rare. I'm usually, just because it's, you know, the scale of things, I'm usually spending my days concentrating on China or India or Texas or, you know, places, but a pleasure for once to get to be sort of thinking about my home state. I started the day in Ripton, where I live, where I got in a little bit of great dawn skiing on the trails at Brattleboro, but then headed down and spoke to the whole 7 to 12 grades at Green Mountain Union High School in Chester, which was really fun. And then I spoke to a lot of the kids at the Hilltop Montessori School. So the thing for me about talking with young people is it's always a little emotionally difficult. I don't spare them anything. I think it's important to speak honestly and frankly about where we are and what's going on, and I think that that's owed them. But I find it hard too. So it's a great pleasure to look out at a bunch of people who I can just unload on completely without any fear whatsoever. I'm actually not going to spend an immense amount of time talking about where we are scientifically and things, because you already know all this. And in fact, I'm not going to talk for that long because I'm more curious just to have some questions and things. But I do want to bring you a little up to date kind of on where things stand at the moment with the biggest thing that's ever gone on planet Earth. Actually, maybe I'll show just a few pictures at the start. Abby, you got that? I don't know how well you can see these. I'm just going to show a few pictures from a trip that I organized to Greenland last year. And I don't know whether you can really see these or not. Basically, the picture is of a lot of ice, because that's what there is in Greenland, a lot of ice. It's the biggest island in the world, and it's the biggest storehouse of ice in our hemisphere. And if it all melted, the oceans would rise about 23 feet. So you can advance another one or two there, and one more even. You can see that it actually is indeed starting to melt. In fact, show this next picture, and I don't know whether anyone will be able to see it or not, but I'll describe it. This is taken from the boat. This expedition that I had organized was on its way to try to get onto the ice shelf, and so we were sailing through the fjord, and you can see, if you look out front, that there's water around as far as you can see for miles around. But if you look at the chart, the electronic chart that's above the captain's wheel, and you see there's a little black dot, the icon that marks where the boat is. And the boat is clearly about a mile onto solid land. So I pointed this out with mild trepidation to the captain. And the captain just laughed in Icelandic laugh and Greenlandic laugh and said, oh, don't worry, the chart's 5 years old. 5 years ago, it was all ice as far as you could see around here, but now it's all open water, so we're fine. And in that sense, we were fine, but in another sense, less fine. If you show the next slide, Abby, the reason I was there was I wanted to take the woman on the left here, whose name is Kathy Jetnil Kajiner, up to Greenland. She's a poet, a wonderful poet who does a lot of great work on environmental issues. And you can see that she's wearing a grass skirt, which is because she's a native of the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific. Now, the Marshall Islands had several thousand peaceful and pleasant years. Then the 20th century was not so good to them because we blew up a large part of the archipelago at Bikini Atoll, so it's still radioactive and you can't go near it and so on, so that wasn't so good. But the 21st century is considerably worse. The highest point on the Marshall Islands is about 1 meter above sea level. I think I'm maybe a meter or so above y'all. So imagine what it's like to be 1 meter above the ocean on a rapidly warming planet. It's terrible, is what it is, and already high tide is starting to come through your living room and so on and so forth. Thank you. I wanted Kathy to deliver one of her poems standing on the ice that when it melted would drown her home. I thought that would add a certain piquancy to the whole thing. And she recruited the woman standing next to her, a young woman named Akka Niviana, who's a Greenlandic native whose homeland is literally disappearing beneath her feet. And if you show the next slide, you can see that indeed the poem that we filmed up there after this fairly harrowing expedition of several days to get everything up on the ice sheet was really wonderful. It's a poem with a certain amount of rage, as one might expect, but also a fair amount of generosity, if for nothing else, understanding that what is afflicting the Marshall Islands today will afflict the rest of us in the not too distant future. You should watch it on YouTube. 6 or 7 million people or something have, and so it was worth the trip, I think. Let's see if that little video plays. This will be the last stuff I'll inflict on you. I'm not a videographer. I took this with my cell phone. You can turn down the sound. We don't need the sound. It's just the sound of a helicopter. We'd been changing the batteries on one of these instruments that scientists use to record the recession of the glaciers, and so we were flying away back over the fjord, and it takes a minute to get to the good part, so I'll just talk. Look, as you all know, climate change is by far the biggest thing that's ever happened to planet Earth. I'll try. My voice may be a little gone too. Climate change is the biggest thing that has happened to our planet, not only in our lifetime, but really for many, many millions of years. The temperature is now rising very fast. We've raised the temperature of the Earth about 1 degree Celsius so far, and that's been enough to cause enormous change. We're getting to the good part here. The ice sheet coming down into the fjord at the sort of leading edge, the snout of the glacier, is about 120 feet high, so about the height of a 12-story building. I don't know, is there a 12-story building in Brattleboro? Not in Middlebury either. But watch the far part at the end there, because just as we happened to be flying over, it started to let loose. And those waves were 60, 70 feet high, so the pilot kind of wanted to leave, but I encouraged him to circle once anyway, because A, it was very beautiful, albeit in an eerie way. It's an incredibly beautiful planet on which we live, and even in its travails, it remains beautiful. And B, because it's just sort of a visceral reminder of what is happening every second of every minute of every hour of every day on this earth now. The change that we have unleashed is now galloping. You can see it in the Arctic. in Greenland or in the sea ice of the Arctic, 70% of which is gone now. You can see it on the dry edges of our continents in California or in Australia, where record drought and record heat have produced record fire. I know you've watched those images from the Antipodes in the last couple of weeks. I've been on the phone almost daily with friends and colleagues in Sydney and Melbourne and Canberra, and it's unbelievable down there. I mean, these are big, rich, modern cities that are, just have been obscured by smoke for weeks now, the dirtiest air on Earth. We think more than 1 billion animals have died in the last month in these fires. People describe going into the sort of first people back into the forest or the burned over areas, and the main sound is animals screaming. There's a kind of Dante-esque vision of hell there. And of course, it's worth just recalling that every time a forest burns, it sends another big pulse of carbon into the atmosphere. Australia's probably produced as much carbon from its forest fires in the last 2 or 3 months as it produces in a whole year of driving cars and running factories and everything else. I could talk for a very long time about all the other physical effects we're already seeing. I'm not going to bother to do that. You know what's happening. You understand the changes that we're seeing. The thing to understand most basically about them is the havoc that we see at the moment is what happens when you raise the temperature of the Earth 1 degree Celsius, 1.8 degrees Fahrenheit. We're on a path at the moment to raise the temperature of the Earth. Even if we kept all the promises that every country had made at Paris, the temperature of the Earth would go up about 3.5 degrees Celsius. Okay? And of course, we're not keeping all the promises we made at Paris. One country, the country that put more carbon into the atmosphere than any other country in history, decided not to keep any of the promises it made at Paris, and in fact to walk away from the only global accord. There's a lot of things to be ashamed of as Americans in the last 4 years, but it's pretty hard to top that for just sheer shamelessness. So we're obviously not going to stop climate change. That's not one of the options on the menu. We're not even going to stop it where it is now. That 1 degree is going to be 1.5 degrees or 2 degrees, even if we do everything right from this point, because there's an immense amount of momentum built into this system. What we're struggling for now is the hope of stopping it well short, or as short as we can, of 3 or 3.5 or 4 degrees Celsius, 6, 7, 8 degrees Fahrenheit rise in temperature. If we do anything like that, we won't be able to have civilizations like the ones that we're used to. The toll is just too high. And you can begin to see and sort of sense what I'm talking about when you think about just any sort of component part of the problem that's coming. So think about migration of peoples as the temperature warms. In Europe, we've seen about 1 million refugees from the Syrian civil war get to Europe. In some measure, those people were climate refugees. The academic literature is now very clear that the deepest drought in the history of what we used to call the Fertile Crescent was one of, if not the most important triggering effect of the civil war there. And the 1 million people that it spun out into Western Europe were enough to discombobulate the politics of an entire continent, bring out the ugly side of that world. So about 1 million people have arrived on our southern border in the last few years. A great many of them, maybe the majority of them, again, climate refugees driven by the very deep drought in the uplands of Honduras and Guatemala. If you look at a map, Honduras and Guatemala are among the few places on Earth with large oceans on either side. The fact that the oceans are warming faster than land has caused deep, deep drought in those places, real changes in historic weather patterns. And you've seen what 1 million people arriving on our borders does to fry the politics of this country, you know. So, having seen what happens with 1 million people in Europe and 1 million people in America, bear in mind that the UN estimate for how many refugees, climate refugees, we can expect in the course of this century with business as usual kind of increases in temperature is about 1 billion. Okay? So multiply that kind of chaos by 1,000 times and try and figure out what kind of world we're going to be living in. I'll just say in passing, I managed to get myself arrested, which I do more often than I would have anticipated, last August at a demonstration around immigration in upstate New York. And it was to try and draw attention to that particular, I mean, if nothing else, we better figure out some strategy that isn't about walls and cages to deal with that kind of change that's coming. But that's just one of, I mean, I could give you a similar spiel about what happens with agriculture on a planet where the temperature goes up like that, what happens with water availability, what happens with disease. You get a little sense of that here. Think about what's the rapid spread of Lyme and other tick-borne disease across southern Vermont as temperatures have warmed. That gives you just a little sense of it. But of course, we're blessed with, you know, at least a somewhat modern healthcare system and so on and so forth. Think what happens in places that are already stressed to try and deliver even the most basic forms of healthcare. Also, just think, and maybe this isn't the most pressing thing on earth, but maybe it is in a sense too. Just think about the way that we understand the world differently as that changes. There are lots of people now who are scared to let their kids go walk in the woods or walk through a field anymore. That psychological change is enormous and sad and will have profound consequences, I think, going forward. All in all, the point I want to make with all of this is simple, which is that our job is very clear. It is that we have to, at all costs, keep the temperature from going up any more than it has to at this point. We have to do everything we can to slow down that rise, and we have to do it now. Like, we are running out of time in which we'll have any leverage over the outcome of this. The thing never to forget about climate change is that it is the first timed test that human beings really have ever stumbled into. Our other problems are severe and profound, but they tend not to come with time limits. Like, we're really screwing up healthcare now. The president's doing everything he can to make it difficult for anybody, poor people to access healthcare. That's hideous. It's going to cause people to die and people to go bankrupt and people to get sick and so on and so forth. But the one thing it won't do is make it harder to solve this problem when we finally get around. Sooner or later, someone is, some America that we can begin to envision is going to say, okay, we should just be like all the other countries on earth and have decent health care, and let's do it. And it won't have become harder to do because we didn't do it in the meantime. Climate change isn't like that. If we do not solve it soon, we will never solve it because we keep going past these series of tipping points from which there's no physical return. We're already past some of them. Nobody has a plan for refreezing the Arctic. No one's going to, it's not like something's going to happen that makes, Australia or the hills of California less flammable over the next few days. There's, tough things are already underway. But there are a dozen more of these big, powerful tipping points. In December, our leading scientists on this published a paper in Nature magazine where they described 11 major tipping points, and they said 9 of them were basically at or within easy sight of now. So as the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said in the fall of 2018, if by 2030 we haven't made fundamental transformations in this system, which they defined as cutting in half the amount of carbon we were producing, then our chance of hitting the targets we set in Paris were going to be nil. They said that in 2018, so we had 12 years left at the time. We're now in 2020. The world's carbon emissions went up, not down, in 2018 and again in 2019. We're very close to out of time. So the question is how to proceed, how to make change in the time that we have, what to do. And I'm not going to talk about all the things, but I'm going to talk about a couple. The first thing I want to say is I think that the time element means that thinking about change in terms of individual action is not a particularly useful way anymore to be thinking about things. It doesn't mean that it's not important to take individual action, and it doesn't mean that one has license to behave irresponsibly or whatever. Yes, you should definitely ride an electric cargo bike like the one that pleasantly squired me here this evening for this talk. Yes, you should definitely eat lower on the food chain. Yes, you should definitely put in a heat pump in your house to replace the oil furnace or the gas burner in the basement. Yes, you should pay complete attention to Alex Wilson and all the million good ideas that he has promulgated over the years, on and on and on. But it also means that if you think about the math, we're not really going to do this one Tesla at a time, one vegan dinner at a time, okay? We're going to have to, the most important thing an individual can do at this point is be less of an individual and join together with others in movements large enough to change the basic political and economic ground rules. And having built those movements, then we have to think about what the targets are that make sense, what we're going to try and do. Some of those changes need to come through politics. And 2020 is obviously a big year for politics, and we all should be thinking and working on it. I'm very, very glad that the Green New Deal is now out there, because it's one of the first legislative programs that's on the same scale as the crisis that we face. And we're all working hard to try and make it happen. It's really exciting to get to work with AOC and to get to work with the people at the Sunrise Movement and elsewhere who are working on this. But I want to say, too, that I don't... you want me to switch to this? All right. We'll see if this is better. Is that better? A little better? I'm sorry. I'm doing my... This is good. I can almost stand up straight now, too. And if it flags, just wave your hand and I'll keep trying. I am a little talked out. I don't think that we should entirely count on political action to get us where we need to go, okay? I think even if you game out this year's elections, and even if everything happens just right, and even if there's a Vermonter in the White House, and even if there's, or a Bay Stater, for that matter, just across the border, either one of them. And even if there's, a change in the Senate and so on and so forth, the odds that we're going to get really fast, thorough overhaul of of everything we need overhauling seems still somewhat small to me. And even if we did that in Washington and everything went right, that's still one capital on a planet that now has a lot of countries that emit a lot of carbon. The U.S. has emitted historically more carbon by far than any other country on Earth, but at the moment we're only producing about 15% of it. So we can't solve the problem ourselves. So along with this whole bucket of work that we're doing around politics, there's another bucket, or there's another power center on our planet, and that has to do with money and finance. Now, they're not disconnected. We all are well aware that big money and big political power have some strong connections with each other and so on and so forth, but they're also distinct. I've done a lot of work on getting political change of various kinds, mostly around fighting the oil companies over infrastructure and projects and things, beginning with the fight over the Keystone Pipeline. And happily, that's morphed into the powerful support now of pretty much everybody in the Democratic Party for what we call keep it in the ground policies, an effort to really kind of turn off the spigot. Really important. The other piece of work that I've done for the last decade is around money. And it began with this work on divestment, trying to get institutions to sell their stock in coal and oil and gas companies, to send a message about those companies and to make it harder for them to do their business. Now, when we started this, and it was very glad you're reading Naomi's book for book group. Naomi and I were sort of dreamed this up together in 2012, this plan to sort of start this divestment thing. Then immediately, Naomi got pregnant, leaving me to go do the 29 city in 30-day tour around America in the back of a bus. But be that as it may, it was successfully launched. And at this point, it's become by far the largest anti-corporate campaign in history. We're now closing in on the $14 trillion mark in endowments and portfolios that have sold their, and you know, the list is amazing. It includes, I'm happy to say, the United Church of Christ, in whose building we are today. It includes the City of New York. It includes the Rockefellers. It includes the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. It includes the City of London's pension fund. It includes the University of California's system, $80 billion in endowment and pension funds. I will add, just in passing, that it does not include the state of Vermont, which makes me sick at heart, that the treasurer of the state of Vermont, Beth Pierce, resolutely refuses year after year to take this seriously or do anything about it. And similarly, UVM, and thank heaven students at UVM are working hard on it. And thank heaven David Zuckerman and others have pledged to try and get it done in Montpelier this year. We'll see. But that would be a place where you could lend an oar really easily and it would help. But at any rate, that campaign has been effective. A couple of years ago, when Peabody Coal, the biggest coal miner on Earth, went bankrupt, they had to list on their legal forms the reason that they went under, and one of them was that divestment had made it so hard for them to raise new capital. This year, or last year, 2019, Shell Oil, in its annual report, said that divestment had become, quote, a material risk, unquote, to its business, which is good because Shell Oil is a material risk to planet Earth, you know? So our job is to do precisely that. We're now busy expanding the money fight from just the oil companies to the banks and the asset managers and the insurance companies that are their money lifeline, okay? And I think this may be one of the real climactic fights of the global warming struggle. These guys are kept in business by this money pipeline that flows mostly from the United States straight to all these big coal and oil and gas companies. There's not that many of these players. 4 American banks, Citi, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and above all, Chase, provide more than a third of all the financing for these companies. Chase alone lent them $196 billion over the last 3 years. They've increased the amount of lending since the Paris Climate Accords. Okay? That's deeply wrong. They are trying to profiteer off the end of the world. There's no other way in which to say it. So our job is to figure out how to get in the way. And we're going to need everybody's help to make this happen. I spent Friday in D.C. in jail again. And it was because you've been following this wonderful work that Jane Fonda has been doing in D.C., these 13 fire drill Fridays. So actually, Jane called up Naomi and I in the fall and to ask our early fall and to ask our advice. Her original plan, bless her heart, she said, I want to go to Washington and camp out across the street from the White House till Election Day. And I said, Jane, I've spent time in Lafayette Square Park. I've spent a number of days there because that's where we sort of staged all the arrests and things at the beginning of the Keystone Pipeline. So I spent 2 weeks of my life there. Trust me, you do not want to camp out there for 14 months. And it wouldn't help anyway because after a while it would. So what you need to do is start bringing your movie star pals to D.C. once a week. And she did. She did a brilliant organizing job, and it's helped enormously. And the last one was Friday, and so while she and Martin Sheen and Joaquin Phoenix and things were getting arrested up on Capitol Hill, a bunch of us were occupying the nearest branch of Chase Bank, right at the Eastern Market there in D.C. And we just walked in and gave them all. We chose wisely because this Chase branch was called a wealth management center, and it meant they had like couches and soft chairs and things, so which was good. We spent a few hours there, and then we spent a many number of hours on the not soft in the central holding cell in D.C. We're obviously out now and back for trial in a few weeks and things, but it was the kind of launch to this campaign. We're headed towards Earth Day 50, April 22nd. Yesterday, Dennis Hayes, who was the originator of Earth Day 50 years ago, and the young people in the Fridays for the Future coalition in this country, kind of Greta's troops in this country, and a few others of us published a letter, an op-ed, calling for 3 days of action beginning on Earth Day plus 50, Wednesday, April 22nd, and continuing Thursday and Friday. 72 hours of action. The middle day of that, Thursday, April 23rd, is going to be about money. And what we're going to need are people in the lobbies of branches, especially of Chase Bank, but we may choose a few others too, but all over this country. Chase has 5,200 branches. And they are, they've already pre-selected them for like high traffic locations around America and so on and so forth. We need to make sure that the message gets out to every one of them. This is especially important for adults to be taking part in, okay? Young people are doing most of the leading about climate change now, and it is wonderful. I have enjoyed the last year or two watching and working with the rise of young people all over the world. I've gotten to be friends with Greta, which has been great fun. She's as great close up as she is from a distance. And the better news is there are thousands of Gretas all over the planet. Young men and particularly young women in every corner of the world who are doing fantastic work. And it's beautiful to see. And it's also completely unfair to take the biggest problem in the history of the world and assign it to high school juniors to solve, okay? So the job is for everybody else to step up, and especially around money, because we don't give 16-year-olds credit cards and they don't have bank accounts and so on and so forth. That's a place where we need to be really weighing in. And we need to be doing it together en masse. So you can go to stopthemoneypipeline.com, which we just debuted, and you can keep checked in with 350 Vermont, because I have no doubt that they'll be playing a big role locally in coordinating this. And I hope Extinction Rebellion and others too. This is going to be a big movement-wide effort to take on these targets. And if we do it right, I'm not saying it's going to be easy. We're talking about the pillars of global capital here, okay? So they're immensely powerful and in some ways immune. But if we do it right, the effects will be remarkable. Because unlike political systems, financial systems move fast, okay? If JP Morgan Chase announced tomorrow that they were no longer going to be lending money to the fossil fuel industry, the effects would be felt on every stock market in the planet within an hour, okay? The valuations of asset after asset would shift immediately and profoundly. We would be living in a different world. And wouldn't just be the United States where this was happening, it would be every place on the planet. That's I guess, the upside of concentrating all the money on Earth in a very few locations. We got a beautiful foretaste of this yesterday in one of the biggest developments in a very long time. We've been campaigning a lot around a company called BlackRock. Okay? Y'all may not know, everybody may not recognize that name because it's not as famous as Citibank or something like that, but it's arguably, almost certainly, the most powerful single firm on planet Earth. They are the asset manager that holds most of the world's passive, when pension funds and things put their money in passive index funds, that's where it goes. And the volume of money is unbelievable. We think that if you added up all the money on Earth, it would be about $80 trillion, okay? Of that, $7.5 trillion is in the digital accounts of this one company, BlackRock. So for obvious reasons, we've been working hard on them for a while, you know. And yesterday, their CEO published his annual letter, and in it he said that from now on, climate change was going to be at the very center of their analysis going forward. Now, he didn't make any great, the actual promises he made were fairly underwhelming. They start with mostly dealing with coal and not other things, not oil and gas, which are at this point probably more significant, and so on. What was more important was the rhetoric he used. He said, this is that the cutting edge of finance is now around climate change, that valuations are going to change extraordinarily quickly, that people have to worry hard about their exposure. Those ideas are going to reverberate with enormous power through the financial industry over the next while. People are rightly somewhat scared about what's coming. What's sad is that they're more scared about what's going to happen to their large piles of money than about what's going to happen to the planet. But what the hell? You know, at this point, morality is probably too much to ask for from our political or economic class. One will settle for fear and or some level of just beginning rationality about where we are, okay? And we need to snowball that and snowball it fast over the next little while. Why is Chase Bank the single biggest focus of this? Well, partly because they lend more money than anybody else, but partly because they the second most important guy at Chase Bank, the lead director, is a guy named Lee Raymond. Lee Raymond, this is his retirement job. Before he retired, his job was CEO of ExxonMobil for 15 years. He was the guy who basically invented corporate climate denial, turned Exxon into a machine for obscuring the truth, costing us 30 years that we needed to try and deal with this problem. I think I may take it more personally than I should, because I've spent the last 30 years of my life engaged in a completely phony debate about whether or not global warming was real, a debate that both sides knew the answer to from the beginning. We now know from great investigative reporting that Exxon knew everything there was to know about climate change 30 years ago. They've uncovered, among other things, astonishing charts predicted with unerring accuracy in the early 1980s what the temperature and the CO2 concentration would be in 2020. Okay, they absolutely knew it, and they absolutely believed it. Exxon began building every drilling rig they built to compensate for the rise in sea level they knew was coming. Okay? What they didn't do was tell the rest of us. Under the direction of Raymond and others, they hired the veterans of the tobacco industry to spin this myth about, there's uncertainty and doubt and so on and so forth. And as a result, we've wasted the most important 30 years that we ever had. That's why 30 years ago, there were modest things that we could have done to solve this problem. A modest carbon tax 30 years ago would have steered the supertanker that is our global economy a few degrees off course, and you know how that works. 30 years later, you're sailing in a whole different ocean. But that's not what we did. We kept going straight ahead. In fact, we accelerated. We've emitted more carbon dioxide since I wrote The End of Nature in 1989 than we have emitted in all of human history before. Okay? That's why no longer can we do modest, easy things. When people complain that the Green New Deal is too radical, say, that's what happens. Like, if the doctor tells you stop smoking, and you don't stop smoking, then 30 years later, you don't get to complain that it's too radical to take your lung out, because that's what happens, okay? And that's where we are. In fact, if you think about it, it's not even now radical to do the things that we're talking about doing. In many ways, it's deeply conservative. All that those of us who are spending our lives doing this are asking for is a world a little bit like the one we were born on, with a little bit of ice at the top and the bottom and the odd coral reef in between and so on. And that's conservative. Radicals work at Exxon and at JP Morgan Chase and at TD Bank. I mean, if you're willing to get up every day and try to get rich by altering the atmospheric chemistry of our planet, even after scientists have told you what it'll do, and even after you've watched it happen, then you are a radical, in a way that nobody in the 1960s ever thought about being a radical. I mean, you're changing the temperature of the Earth, okay? So, I'm getting wound up here. I'll wind down. I will just say, the Earth is way outside its comfort zone. So we need to be at least a little bit outside ours at this point. This is the historical task of our time, maybe of all time. And it's, it really is incumbent, especially upon those of us who are of a certain age, to make the next few years really count. We do not want to be the first generations on the planet who leave the place way, way worse than we found it, okay? It is a stunning and sad indictment of us. I talk every day to young people who say things like, I don't want to have kids now. I'm too scared to have kids. Think about having created a world where that's how people think about it. I mean, it's beyond sad. it moves into something else. So the flip side of that is we get the great privilege, the great honor of getting to really fight for the planet in its most, desperate moment, and we get to do it from a place where we have some leverage, because we live in a world that's politically, in a country, in a place that's politically important, and more importantly, because we live in the richest part of the world that the world's ever seen. And if we can't figure out how to leverage that into real change, then shame on us. If you look at that map that Donald Trump always passes around that shows the red parts of the country and how they overwhelm the blue. I'm always really happy to see the little Vermont sliver of blue in the middle of it, I got to say. But when you look at that map, when you think about money in this country, it's exactly the opposite. All the money is in those little blue places. Chase doesn't care what goes on in Wyoming. They don't care what goes on in, Kansas. There's not enough money there, but there's enough money in Boston and New York and San Francisco and Seattle to scare the hell out of them if we mobilize it, move it, if we make this kind of push. I don't know. Let me just, I know everybody here's hard at work on this and has been for years, and I'll just end by saying how grateful I am to you all. We don't know how this comes out. It'd be a lot easier if I could tell you, if we do everything right at this point, it's going to come out okay. It's not going to come out okay. The planet's already warming. And it's possible that we've waited too long to get started and it's not going to come out okay at all, okay? There are scientists who think the momentum of this system may have reached them, but most science indicates that we remain in this, for a few more years, in this narrow closing window where we still have some leverage. And if we do, let's act on the assumption that we do, and let's use everything that we've got to make it happen. I really like, much as I enjoy working with young people everywhere, it's also really good to see people of a certain age here tonight. I remember when I wrote the letter asking people to come to Washington to get arrested at the beginning of the Keystone Pipeline, which is a hard letter to write, say, come go to jail, but it worked. This turned into the biggest civil disobedience action about anything in this country in many years and catapulted that into the kind of signal environmental fight of the decade and really helped rally everybody around the idea that we were going to have to stand up to the oil companies and so on. It was good. But what was best was, I said in the letter, I didn't think that in this case young people should have to be the cannon fodder. They were doing most of the work. But if you're 19 or 14 or whatever, it's possible that an arrest record is not the best thing for your resume. One of the few unmixed blessings of growing older is, past a certain point, what the hell are they going to do to you? And so it was with pleasure that we watched a lot of people with hairlines like mine arrive in Washington to take part. Now, we did not ask people as they were getting arrested, how old are you? Because that would be rude. But cleverly, I think, we said, who was president when you were born? And the two biggest cohorts were from the FDR and the Truman administrations. On the last day, there was a guy arrested with a sign around his neck that said, World War II vet, handle with care. He was old enough that he'd been born in the Warren Harding administration, which was long enough ago that I'd forgotten there was a Warren Harding administration, okay? The point was, it was really good for the young people who were there to see elders acting the way that we need elders to act in a working society. So, do what you got to do, everybody. Let's figure this out, and let's at least, at the very least, put on a hell of a good showing in the next few years. Thank you all. Okay. So thank you all. I'm back to this microphone because Scott has the other one. Now it's completely, you go ahead and leave without the slightest, it's not rude at all, and it's a nice night out there, and I'm going to leave pretty soon too. But for a moment, if there are sort of questions or comments or other ideas or abuse or whatever, just I laid it on you heavy, so you feel free to lay it back on me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm taking your analogy about the man who's smoking and then has to go through extreme measures 30 years later. Our Earth is smoking. Our Earth is on fire. And we need to support her immune system. And ecosystem restoration is one of the main things we need to do as a positive thing, not fighting that negative piece of the extraction of all of her inner fluids. So let's look at ecosystem restoration. The UN has declared the 20s to be the decade on ecosystem restoration, and I think that's something each of us can support, and maybe all that money that those big institutions are not going to be getting for oil, maybe that can be going into restoring our ecosystems.
I'm really glad you mentioned it. I was really glad, too, to see the banner from Extinction Rebellion about regenerative agriculture. It's exciting to watch what's happened. In the last few years, we've started to learn a lot more about this, and the idea that we could sequester serious amounts of carbon in healthier soil is a really promising idea. I will say, the thing that makes it hard is not, we don't know enough about it yet, and people are working hard and studying it, and it's really good. I had the great pleasure of being out with my friends at the Land Institute in Kansas this fall for the Prairie Festival, and there's no place on earth they're working harder, and they're coming up with good, powerful ideas about perennializing annual agriculture and so on and so forth. The one thing that's going to make it slightly hard to have it work in the time that we need, or the thing to be worried or to bear in mind, is simply that there are something like 1 billion farmers on the planet. And so figuring out how to scale something so that you reach that many, and agricultural practices are deep in people's history and traditions and economies and things. So that's that's both the promise and the work to be done. One of the reasons that we go after oil companies and banks and stuff so hard is because, powerful as they are, there's a kind of manageable target set, that you can try and. But no question that you're right. And one of the things that's most powerful is the French government, during the Paris Climate Accords, passed a law called the 4 per 1,000 law that incentivizes farmers to increase soil carbon 0.4% each year. And there are lots of farms. I just coordinated a big program at the French Embassy in New York, the UN Embassy, in October. And there were lots of farmers there demonstrating just how much progress they were making on this. So it's very exciting work, and we should definitely be on it. Thank you for reminding us about that.
I'm just going to also, jump on the mic to say, before you leave, please do make sure that you sign in.
Yes. We can't, the world does not work if we don't have your email address. That's
so true.
How it works.
But just one of the things you were saying, acting less like an individual and more like a community, you can stay in touch with us about what we're doing locally. So sign in, there are clipboards going around, and there's one at the door.
I'm going to practice gender and, it's not political, but right and left equity.
So one of the links between, there's links between divestment and politics. I hear this ad on XM radio about if you invest in oil right now, you get 100% of your investment deducted this year. This is a result of the Trump tax law from 17 or 18, whenever it was. These things are closely linked.
Yep.
Changing that makes it that much more quicker that you can't get your money back.
Absolutely. And look, I mean, do not construe anything that I said to say you shouldn't be hard at work on. I mean, political change in this country this year would be a huge and important deal. Be a huge and important deal on all kinds of fronts, not just climate. There's a million places where the kind of cruelty of our government and systems are overwhelming. It would also, I mean, I don't know about any of you. I don't think the planet can stand 4 more years of a Trump administration. I know I can't stand 4 more years of it. I mean, just like my psychological system is unequal to the task of doing this. And I might make it through November, but man, oh man, I don't know what happens after that. So yeah, look, this is a big year on a lot of fronts. And the good news is that all the Democrats, especially Bernie and Warren, have really good policy. I mean, I wrote at Bernie's behest, I was his delegate to the Democratic Platform Writing Committee last time around, and really helped write, argued with the other folks about the environmental platform. Every single Democrat running for office is a mile to the left of where Bernie was on this 4 years ago. So activism has really worked to kind of push. We took it as our goal this year to turn all these guys into climate candidates. And that kind of window has moved and moved decisively. If we can get somebody elected who isn't Trump, it will be an enormous change. And really one has Bernie originally to thank for that 4 years ago, for kind of jumping in and moving us in that direction. And now there's lots and lots of fruit of that work. And so let's keep hoping and keep working. The only point I was trying to make, I mean, and if you're like, I mean, I want everybody working on finance, but I'll make 2 exceptions. If for some reason you have an absolutely key role to play in electing someone president over the next while, then stick to that. And if you're a solar engineer who is able to drop the price of a solar panel another % or 2 or 3 or 4 in the next few years, don't leave your lab. Stay there hard at work, and the rest of us will take care of getting arrested and whatever else. But if you're not in those categories, then spare some time also for this other work too, because I think it's important. Thank you for that.
So what would you say is like an 8th grader to be doing as like something that's big that can help?
So absolutely. So, I mean, this is the point is 8th graders are pretty much the only people on earth doing what they need to be doing right now, okay? I cannot tell you how many of my close colleagues now are in like junior high school. I was telling someone today, I had to take a few days off in October for the task of writing college recommendations for people that I consider close daily working colleagues, okay? So young people need to continue doing what they're doing. The mobilizations that started 18 months ago with Greta's school strike in Sweden and that spread around the world have been an immensely important tool. And it's young people who are taking the lead in the overall organizing for this 3 days of action, April 22nd, 23rd, 24th. So be in touch with Fridays for the Future US, the sort of coalition. Join in. I'm sure that there's I met lots of people at the Montessori school who are engaged in this work, and I'm sure there's people at all the schools around here who are doing it. Being out in the streets, essentially shaming your elders about all this is truly important work at this point. And the reason that it's so important is that you have real moral capital in this. I mean, look, I'm going to be dead before the absolute worst of all of this comes crashing down upon us. I don't think I'm going to be dead in time to miss we're already seeing really horrifying stuff. But you if we don't get things under control, are going to find yourself in the absolute prime of your life. And whatever it is that you wanted to do and that you trained to do and educated yourself to do, you're going to have to stop doing a lot of the time, because the basic job of human beings, if we don't slow things down, is going to be emergency response until the point where we run out of the resources to do emergency response. That's why young people have such moral capital here, to tell the rest of us to get our act together. It's really interesting to watch it happen. Like, I teach a little bit at a university, and the basic construct of a university is old people tell young people things, and that's all right, because old people theoretically have acquired some experience and knowledge, and it's good to pass it on, and that works and whatever. But when we've been doing these divestment campaigns at colleges around the country, I keep telling young people to say to the boards of trustees and things, in this case, you have to listen to us, because in this case, it's our lives that are on the line. And so you can't just keep doing what you're doing because it's comfortable and you're used to it. You've got to make some changes. I think that that's, I don't know, I shouldn't even say this because it'll be controversial and make people sad and things, but it's like, it reminds me of the fights over whether or not we should have windmills in Vermont or not, And I tell you that that they tend to break down largely by age. And I think that there's, sometimes I despair that the state slogan of Vermont has become like, do whatever you want once I'm dead, but, until then, let's keep it the same, okay? We can't keep things the same anymore. We have to make real changes. Compared with the changes that people have to make elsewhere in the world, not so much, If you're living in Bangladesh right now, you have to decide whether you're going to leave your farm where on the seacoast where your family has farmed for 40 generations because now there's salt encroaching on the soil and you can't grow anything. You have to decide how you're going to move your family to the edge of the capital city and live in a cardboard box, okay? That's a hard decision. But a decision about whether or not to sell your oil stocks or to change your credit card to someone that comes from a decent bank or something, on the list of changes, those are pretty easy. So we can't let that inertia keep control of us. We have to be willing to do the things that we can do and look for the places where we have real leverage.
Hi, sorry, you were just kind of talking about divestment, but I wanted to further the conversation on that. I'm a faculty member at a educational institution that has an obscenely large endowment. It's pretty gross. And I'm also on my way out. I'm leaving after this year, so I want to leave with a bang. And I'm just wondering what you would think are some first steps for taking to start a divestment campaign.
What's the name of your institution? You don't have to say.
I don't really. It's Deerfield Academy.
Okay, good. Well, so I'm on my way. I mean, that's really important. I'm on my way to give a talk at Phillips, one or another of the Phillips, one of your brother institutions, not long from now. It's really important because these are, not only do they have a lot of money, but they are precisely the places to be raising these questions. One of the great things about the divestment campaign is that when you go up against boards of trustees, they're composed of the most important people on earth, and they should have to face these questions day in, day out, over and over again. So, it's not that hard to get one of these things going. You need 10 students who are interested in it, and you need them to do what young people are good at. Complaining, getting in the way, making a ruckus, doing some, and so they start off by sending a letter to the Board of Trustees, and then they ask to be heard at the next Board of Trustees meeting. And if they are and nothing happens, then the one after that, there's 50 students with signs lining the hallway into where the, trustees are meeting. And even if you don't win right away, you've accomplished an enormous amount. This divestment thing, actually, when we started it, Naomi and I thought it was mostly a kind of educational mission. a good way to raise these questions, because most people don't have a coal mine or a pipeline in their backyard, thank God, you know. But everybody has connections to some pot of money, whether it's at their church or their alma mater or their pension fund or something like that. And so it was a way for everybody to get involved. And as it turned out, it snowballed to the point where it actually had big financial effects too, along with, but just doing that work there would be terrific. That's a good place to be doing it. And we've got some resources to help you. Just email me and I'll send you some stuff, and good on you. That's lots of fun.
Bill, we want to honor your time commitments. How many more questions would you be able to take?
Let's do a couple more, and then
okay.
It's true. It might even snow tonight, so I should be on the road before.
I'll go on this side, and I'll just ask a very brief question. 2 weeks ago, I preached a sermon wherein I showed a clip of Greta, and I was talking about prophecy. And not a member of the church, but someone got up and walked out in the middle of the sermon. What, if any, strategy have you come across that is persuasive to climate change denialists? Or do we abandon them? Do we go civil war?
No.
Or do we try to persuade them?
My advice would be don't worry about them too much. Look, there's 2/3 of the country that understands what's going on with climate change. The polling's pretty clear. The number continues to go up. That's good. I mean, it's hard to get 2/3 of Americans to agree on just about anything. So it's not a bad number. I mean, and the reason is partly because we've built big movements, and it's partly because, you know, California catches on fire. It's partly because nobody in the Midwest could plant this spring because it was so wet, you know, on and on and on. I mean, at a certain point, it's like, who are you going to believe? You know, Fox News or your own lying eyes? The third of people who don't agree with this are never, it's not like they're waiting to read one more study in the proceedings of the National Academy, you know, journal before they change their mind. I mean, if you'd spent the last, 25 years marinating in Rush Limbaugh, this is how you would think too. And it's too much to really expect people to deeply change. So I always tell people, do not ruin Thanksgiving arguing with your crazy uncle about climate change. Spend Thanksgiving recruiting your sweet aunt who's actually worried about it to do something. Because the problem is that the 2/3 of people who care about this, only a really small sliver are actually out taking action, joining together. We don't need to get all of it. You don't need everybody. I was telling the kids earlier today at the Montessori school who were worried about exactly the same question. I gave them this, and I said, you don't need to worry about all the time about apathy. Apathy is always a fact of human life. People always have things going on in their lives. They're raising children. They're working 3 jobs. There's always going to be people who you can't involve. That's okay. And in fact, you don't worry about it because it cuts both ways, okay? We worked super hard to help organize these climate strikes in September and turn out 7 million people. It took immense amounts of work on the part of everyone involved. The only thing we didn't worry about, did not cross our minds, was that a day later there would be 7 million people in the street demanding more global warming, okay? Backing it. That will not happen. Apathy cuts both ways. If we can get 4, 5, 6% of the population deeply engaged in this fight, we will win it. And we're partway there. We're 2 or 3% of the population now who are taking action, committing. If we keep doing it, then we'll be all right. So that's the thing to worry about. If you have to say something to people, I always just say, well, you may not believe in global warming, but global warming believes in you.
So this is a question related to those of us with white hair. I've been thinking for a long time about the way we all saved up for our retirements, and we have money put away, invested in our IRAs for retirements. Is there any united, concerted effort among people who have investments to go at divestment from that? Not pensions, but investments?
Yeah. So that's what we're, that's one of the things we're working hard on that'll be part of this stuff we're doing in April. That's why one of the targets are BlackRock and Vanguard and State Street, the big, where most people have their investment money, okay? And if we can move those guys, it makes a huge difference. And so BlackRock just announced that they're going to be having serious funds, that they're setting up serious investment funds on sustainable grounds. That's a huge deal because there's tons of money that flows just automatically into these places. That'll make a big difference. But there's lots of people you can seek out that'll offer really good sustainable investment portfolios.
But I mean, is there an organization of people
Yes.
making these investments who are doing this together?
Yes. That's why you need to go to stopthemoneypipeline.com. And as the spring goes on, hopefully we'll have resources for exactly what you're talking about. Last question.
Hi, Bill.
Hey.
I've been a follower of 350 since I met Jamie and Kelly and May at Barbara Boxer's office.
Yes.
And I've been on pretty much every thing you've done. I've been arrested twice with Jane Fonda, and I listened to you last week. And that was the first time I heard that Lee Raymond was actually on the chase. I guess he's on the board of directors. So I write letters to Rex Tillerson and a lot of people. What I'm thinking is we have 300 to 400 people here. And what I envision is an avalanche of letters on Lee Raymond's desk. Do you think if we all wrote a letter once or twice or once a week or once a month, that would do any good?
It's not a bad idea. I wouldn't send them to Lee Raymond. I think he falls in that category of not going to change. But his boss, or the CEO of Chase, is a guy called Jamie Dimon. And he does care about his public profile and things, and it's one of the things we're going to be calling out. So that'll be a part of this work at stopthemoneypipeline.com. So be on it. Thank you for your work, and thanks everybody. I know that there are better ways, more cheerful ways to spend an evening than listening to me, and I'm grateful that you came anyway, because I know it means that you are the people who are committed to do this work. And we will do it together, and we will do it with good heart and good spirit, and then we will let the chips fall where they may, because that's what we can do. So thank you all immensely.